Good afternoon. I'm Lillian Lodge Copenhaver, Dean Emeritus and Professor in the School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Florida International University. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our leadership webinar today as our inaugural effort of the Lillian Lodge Copenhaver Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication. The mission of our center is to empower both women professionals and academics in all the fields of communication in order to develop visionaries and leaders who can make a difference in their communities and in their profession. So today we take our first step. We are also developing a research forum which will become the go-to place for studies on women in communication. And other activities that we are planning include a conference, other webinars, and a mentorship program. All of these are designed to establish us as the thought leadership center for the next generation of women leaders in the field of mass communication. So thank you for joining us today. You will be hearing more from us. And it is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Maria Elena Villar, our host for this afternoon.
Hi, my name is Maria Elena Villar, and I will be hosting and moderating the question and answer session after our presentation. So just as a little bit of housekeeping, you will notice in your screen you can enter text into the chat box. So please enter your questions in the chat, and I will moderate those at the end of the presentation. So I would like to introduce our inaugural speaker for our leadership webinar series, Mindy Marquez. Ms. Marquez is the Executive Director and Vice President of the Miami Herald. She began her journalism career as a summer intern and moved her way up, going through different parts of that newspaper, like the neighbors section and the metro section, and became deputy editor. She spent some time also as the Miami bureau chief for People magazine, and since returned to the Herald in 2007 to help oversee the launch of Miami.com. And she became the first female executive director of a major US newspaper in October 2010. So she's going to share with us some of her insights that she's gained throughout her career and her experience as a female leader in the communication industry.
Thank you. And just a quick note, I was the second I'm the first Hispanic editor of the Miami Herald, but the second woman there. Janet Chesmere, which is a scholarship that FIU recognizes. So I'm going to start with a story, because that's what we do, right? We're storytellers. 2 years ago, more or less, my boss at the time was in the midst of reorganizing the newsroom, and he invited me to lunch. And so I was trying to think about what I might say, how that conversation might go. We went to a restaurant on the beach, and so things are unfolding, and at one point he asked me, so what is it that you want to do? And so I thought, this is my chance. And I said, I want to be the number two. I want to, to be the number one to you. I want to be the managing editor. And so, we had our lunch, and I was so proud of myself. I thought, okay, I did it. I go home and I tell my husband, you start over the dinner table and you're giving him the play-by-play, and I'm saying, okay, and then, he asked me, what is it you want to do? And I said, I want the number two job. And my husband said, why didn't you ask for his job? and that to me was like two key lessons in that. Number one, that's like the difference between a man and a woman and how they think about things. And number two, I will say that the truth is that I never thought that my career would lead me to be executive editor of the Miami Herald. Perhaps it's because I could never have dared to dream that I could end up in that place where I am right now. I got here through a winding path, not entirely of my own making. There's a lot of influences along the way that helped me get to where I am. I'll tell you that I started out, I can thank a 8th grade teacher, Mrs. Pomeroy, who's the first person who ever told me that I could be a writer. She had assigned us to read the Diary of Anne Frank, which I know is required reading for almost everyone. And after I turned in my essay, she said, you really should think about writing, and why don't you join the school newspaper, which I did. And by the time that I got to Hialeah High, I just knew I was going to be a reporter. That's what I wanted to do. I joined the newspaper. I was the geeky kid who'd get excited at the sight of a Miami Herald truck because I would say I'm going to work there one day. And I went to the University of Florida, and I began my career at the Miami Herald as a college intern one summer. I started in the neighbor section, which many of you know is the twice weekly community news section of the paper. And I will say that, once you begin your professional path, there are things that college, right, prepares you for, and then there's the on-the-job training that really you can't get until you start working in your chosen career. Being a woman in a male-dominated business really does offer a lot of lessons, and I think it's a lot easier now than it was when I started. But I think these things probably apply just broadly to a lot of career choices. I will try to just go through a few of them that I hope will spare some people a little pain along the way, to pass along from my own experience. I would say that I want to start out with the concept of confidence. I've always admired those women who, I hate to say it, but I term it, they act like a man and they own the room and they walk, like they own the place and they plot their career and they know what they want. But the reality is there's too few of those women. For many of us, it's a challenge to really feel confident in our own skin in the workplace. As women, we tend to dwell on our weaknesses, and men, I think, focus more on their strengths. And if they don't have their strengths, they will hide it and pretend that it's a strength. And I liken it to our daily routine. This is why we will look in the mirror and we'll see the gray hair, we'll see the wrinkle, we'll see, oh my God, I'm so fat, or this doesn't look good on me, or whatever. And yet, my overweight male neighbor has no problem strutting through the street without his shirt. This is a key difference between men and women. We often bring that self-criticism to the workplace as well. And so we're dissecting our abilities, second-guessing ourselves. The conversation in the brain, is constantly one of, self-doubt and questioning. And that's bad enough, but often enough, these things come, the bubble becomes the actual verbal words come out of your mouth. And when I was a young reporter, my editor at the time called me and he said, I need you to go to Cuba in 2 days. And I was like, what? He's like, no, because they had planned another reporter to go, and then he couldn't go because his wife had a baby, and so he just told me I had, it was now this is a great plum assignment, especially if you were a reporter at the Miami Herald. And, but my reaction was, I can't do it. I can't do it. I don't have time to prepare. It's 2 days. I'm sorry. I have to do research. And never mind that I spoke Spanish fluently. I'm the child of Cuban parents, so I'm Cuban American. I understand the culture, and that the person that I was going to supplant didn't even speak Spanish. Did I mention he was a man? Yeah. But luckily for me, my boss, which I have to mention was also male, just ignored me. I mean, he said, you're going. He had more confidence in me than I had myself, and I have to tell you that ended up being one of the best assignments of my career. It was a whirlwind tour of Cuba. I did great stories for print, and then the stories that you share over cocktails. Those are the different kinds of stories. But the point is that if that had been someone else, I would have missed a really terrific opportunity, because why would somebody have confidence that I could do the job if I am not expressing confidence in doing the job myself? So what I have told many young women is, just perfect your poker face. If you're feeling that, call a really good friend, talk to your mom, go to the bathroom, lock yourself up, have a good crying session, and then but but when you get out, you can do it. You know, fear is a great motivator to do good. You know, be careful of the person who feels like they can conquer the world. If somebody's not scared trying something new, then I would worry about that person's ability. As women, we often believe that if we just do a good job, somebody's going to notice, and one day they're going to just reward us for our hard work. So we wait and we wait until we're noticed, and sometimes we're not. And then we're disappointed when nothing happens, but we haven't really made our intentions or our desires clear. I remember soon after I got a promotion, I walked into a meeting in a conference room. And it's the big conference table in the middle with the chairs lined up on either side of the wall. And I took a seat at the chair behind the wall, next to the wall. And then my boss turned to me at the time and he said, "Sit at the table." And you know, you've probably heard that refrain recently from Sheryl Sandberg, the chief operating officer of Facebook. But really, it's good advice to take both figuratively and literally, to sit at the table. You know, you have to be there to make things happen. You have to be involved. You have to put yourself in the middle of things in order to be part of the decision-making process, in order to influence outcomes. So don't sit at that back row. And then lastly, I think there is a power in being a woman. There is a power in femininity, and we should embrace it and use it as part of our success. You know, you don't need to be a man or act like a man or in order to be successful. I would say that I'm a mom. I have 2 kids, and I would say that two of the decisions that I made, mostly because of my family, and there were career choices that I made at the time, ended up having the biggest impact on my professional career. And I did them not because I thought it was going to be necessarily a great path for me career-wise, but because it was the right thing to do for my family at the time. The first was soon after the birth of my son. An editor at the time had approached me and said, did I want to try to be an editor? I was a reporter. I thought I was going to be a reporter my entire life because that's what really first drew me to the business. And I wasn't so sure at the beginning. And so we struck a deal. And the deal was, you'll try it for 3 months. If you hate it, you can go back to being a reporter. And if we don't like you, you can go back to being a reporter. So that sounded fair to me. And that turned out to be a great choice for me at the time. I went to Neighbors, which is twice a week, and the pace was really perfect for my personal life at the time with a newborn. And at the same time, I discovered that I really enjoyed editing, that I loved being able to work with reporters to help them do great work, and I didn't need the fix of the byline in the paper that some people really do need and thrive on. So that put me really on the path to where I am now. And the second one was actually when I did leave the Miami Herald for a period of time, about 4.5 years. I got a job opportunity to be the magazine, the bureau chief for People magazine in Miami. And again, my children were very young. At that point, I had my daughter as well. And it was the flexibility of the hours, was really attractive to me more than the job. At one point, at the time, a mentor said to me, just know that you may not be able to come back to traditional journalism. So I was forewarned in his eyes, and I took that seriously. I thought, well, maybe once I go to a magazine, I won't be able to, and something that's considered a celebrity magazine, although we'll tell you that everything is deeply reported and it's really hard to do that kind of reporting. So I did leave, knowing that I might not be able to come back, but it turned out not to be the case. It turned actually to be, it actually helped me. It made me more attractive because now I had more well-rounded set of experiences. I had experience in other corporate culture. I had an idea of how magazines approach stories that would be useful to storytelling as well for a newspaper. So when I say embrace your femininity, I mean, you know, the entire scope of it. And part of it, and this may be heresy to say, but I would say that run as hard as you can when you're in your job and just give it all you got. But I would also say don't postpone. If you want a family, I would say be smart about it. You can plan for it, but I absolutely wouldn't postpone that for your career, because, you know, nature gives us a short window to get that part right, and yet, you know, you have the rest of your life to pick up the career. And I've just seen too many cases of women who have waited till the job was just perfect, and then it was too late. So I would say don't give up your personal part of your life, but give all you got while you're at work, because, you know, you have to be great, and often you have to be better than just about anybody else too. I remember when I went back to work shortly after giving birth to my son, and one of the editors at the time, she was a senior editor, and the little secret is when you go back to work after having a child, you're a little not less motivated. Is that probably not the right word, but you're really not all there, right? You're a little distracted, I would say. And I think she put it perfectly. She's like, "How are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm fine. You know, it's really difficult." And she goes, "Yeah, you know, once you've created life, everything else seems like really minor after that." And I go, "Yeah, that's about how I'm feeling right now." Luckily for all of us, you know, that you get over that in a couple of weeks, and you find your speed again, you find your pace. But, you know, the reality is that overall, a lot of the strengths of being a woman are strengths in the workplace. You know, we're nurturers, we're bridge builders, we're problem solvers, we're collaborators, and these are all critical skills in the workplace. And we don't, again, have to do it like a man would do it, but this doesn't mean that that's a wrong way. Actually, I think this brings a lot of benefits to the table. And I would say that I like to find a subtle way every day to remind myself of that, especially if you're in a male-dominated field, or if you're feeling in a place that's a little bit overwhelming. I personally love Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, who turned it into art form with her pins, and she would, as you might know, she would carefully choose her pins to deliver these very direct messages to the heads of state, and they were overwhelmingly all men. And she's a small woman, right? And she'd walk in with these pins, and like when Saddam Hussein's poet laureate called her a unparalleled serpent, she wore a snake pin to make a statement, right? Like, don't tread on me. And then when she was discussing the Middle East with Yasser Arafat, she wore a bee, and she said it was because she wanted to remind him that America would strike back if it was pushed into a corner. So there's an artful way of combining the two things, and I would say find your own way. You know, for me, I like to walk into a sea of dark suits with red shoes, just to, you know, just to lighten up the mood. But so I would just say that in the end, really, there is power in being a woman. There's power in some of the things that we can bring, and embrace it. You know, we don't want to succeed as men. We want to succeed as women, with all that entails.
Thank you.
Are you okay?
Yes, I'm sorry. That's fantastic. So I welcome questions from those that have joined us online and from the audience, but I will start with a question. What do you think we can do as educators, as mentors, as parents of young women that are thinking of going into careers in communication to change the paradigm of leaning back, right? To teach them that it's okay to focus on their strengths rather than their weaknesses, to get attention on themselves. What do you think could be done differently from the teaching and mentoring perspective?
You know, I think it takes a lot of you have to even be really self-aware, because I found with my daughter, I found myself, you know how you always, you might say, oh my gosh, I'm gained so much weight, or I've done, you know, I'm heavier now and this doesn't fit. And then I try to catch myself, because what am I telling her? I'm telling her, no, you look great, but me, I'm the one who, you know, but what is the lesson that I am telling her? What is she hearing about all that negativity that I'm saying out loud? So I think that particularly the women in the house have to be really careful about how you even speak about yourself, that you're not inadvertently passing these things, these kinds of this baggage to our daughters. And then I also think, you know, I think also if you have a daughter who has a little bit of oomph, like, don't quash it. And I say that because, like, I have a daughter who happily is a little bit more like my husband in that regard, and he was the one who was really instrumental in saying, you know, don't, because I would try to, sometimes I would, you know, because she's, you know, she knows what she wants, and she's direct, and she's all the things that are going to serve her well when she's a professional. There's not serving me too well now in my own house, you know, as a mom, but there's a balance, because you don't want to, you know, squelch it out of her when she's going to really need it, and it's going to be useful later down the line. So I think those are two small things, but it's a continuous battle.
We have a question from one of our audience members. Can you discuss the role of mentors in your professional development? Did you have any people along the way that were instrumental in helping you become a leader?
Yeah, actually I did, and I had official and unofficial mentors, right, which is the way that it works. And my previous boss was a really huge influence in terms of helping move me along, and he was a teacher too. So he, in the sense that I felt like he helped. He knew the skills that I needed to have, and he helped me along the way and kind of developing the skills that I needed to have. And that was really key. And at the same time, more recently I had an official mentor. He was a publisher at another paper, and it was another chain, which was really great, because it's always nice to have somebody who's outside your immediate work environment, so you feel completely at ease. Of just having honest discussions, I think, is really key. And so I had the ability to be able to discuss with him situations that perhaps I didn't feel comfortable handling, or I wanted to make sure that this was the right thing to do, and that was really helpful to me, having someone outside the organization. But really, I have to say, it starts with like my 8th grade teacher, and then, you know, there's another teacher in high school, and then there's somebody in college. So along the way, somebody, you know, lends a hand, and it's really huge. And some people don't, I think, underestimate how much impact they can have in your life. I'm not sure my 8th grade teacher knows that. Because of this one remark that she made, that I started a career in writing as a journalist. I think it's really important.
I find that sometimes it's hard to explain to men why we need special leadership programs or discussions for women, because there are leaders like you and many other women leaders. So they might say, so what's the problem, right? Where's the challenge? Right. Do you have any advice on how we can bring men also into nurturing women leadership, and maybe explaining why we think we need more women leaders? I've
been lucky in the sense that I did have 2 very strong mentors who were men, and I think that the approach wasn't, which is actually almost the best way. It's not, the approach wasn't, oh, you are a woman and you need special, you know, you need special help. But it was like, okay, so you have leadership potential and you could do this job, but here's some things you need to know along the way. And it's as small as like I remember one time I wrote something, and I tend to go for humor, and I'm self-deprecating, and my boss had too much self-deprecation, take some of that out.
Sure,
you know? And so that was helpful, because again, you don't see it from that perspective. And I have to say, my husband is like my coach, which I already mentioned him with my daughter, but he's been really helpful to me too, because a lot of times I will want to, you have something happen at work, and I'll go home and I'll say, I want to say this, that, and the other. He's like, what's your goal? Will saying that meet your goal? Then don't say it. Do you think they don't already know such and such and such? So, and then I get that perspective from, the other side, because sometimes I have to, as a woman, right? You want that emotional space. I'm going to tell you because it's going to make me feel better, to let you know how I feel. And, but really, what's the whole point of it? And so I think I've been lucky, and I think that there are men, especially, they have daughters, sisters. I think it's finding the right people to do it.
Well, and something that you mentioned that is something that Sheryl Sandberg also talks about is the importance of sharing responsibilities at home and having support at home. Also, that the kind of support network that you have at home makes it easier.
Yeah, marry well, that's what I have to say. Yeah, by that I don't mean that he has money, it means that he's willing to change diapers, pick up the kids, cook, and that was really important for me. I was lucky in two ways. First of all, I was lucky that my mother is still here, so abuela was around to help me with my children. I mean, there were times early on when literally my mother was spending more time with my children than I was, and trust me, when you're in this career, there's no daycare that closes at 9 o'clock at night, so, and also my husband's very understanding, because again, when I was coming home at 2 or 3 in the morning after an election, he had to make sure that, it wasn't an election, I was at work, and there's my husband would, just as he says me, would cook, clean, change a diaper, it really was an equal partner, and I think that's key, because if you don't have that, then it's really difficult to be able to be a leader and work as hard as you need to work at home, if you have all that hanging over you at home too. So thank you, Abuela, and thanks to my husband.
Are there any questions here in the audience? Well, what about very specifically about being a journalist and working in the news industry? What advice would you have for women, besides the general advice of seeking leadership opportunities and things like that, but specifically in the career of journalism?
Right.
What advice would you have for someone who's looking for a leadership career?
Well, I always tell, just to begin with, I think you have to be a great journalist. And the only way you can be a great journalist is if you do it. Journalism is one of those things that it's really a craft, and so you have to do it. It's like the Nike commercial, right? You just have to do it. So sometimes we see young students who come to us and they've got like a great GPA, and this is no offense, don't let your grades slide, but if you've got a 4.0 GPA but you've never written a story on deadline, that's not going to do you any good. Mm-hmm. So I always tell people the single best thing that anyone can do for their career as a journalist, you have to get real hands-on practical experience. You have to do it. You have to, even if you do it for free, do it for your college paper. That will lead to an internship. Try for internships really early in your career. I mean, I was lucky. I got my first one my sophomore year, and that you get an extra one in. So, and then you learn on the ground. And I think also there's an assertiveness. I don't want to say aggressiveness, but almost that you have to have as a journalist, right? We're frequently working on deadlines. The deadlines have never been more difficult than they are today, because it used to be that you at least had to the next day's newspaper, right, to finish your story and get your reporting in. But now, it's a minute by minute news cycle. So you have to write for the website. You have to write for, you have to tweet something out. You have to post on Facebook, and so it's even more important now to have that speed. But you also can't be really timid. If you need that quote, you have to go get that quote. If you have to talk to somebody, you have to go and seek them out. You got to knock on doors, and that may not be a comfort zone for a lot of folks and for a lot of women, but you have to do that. That's something that you just have to almost have an out-of-body experience and be aggressive, because that is really key to success in this business. You have to be able to move quickly. And so I think those two components just are really key to just being able to succeed. I would say also be open to things, because now you know, you can write for website-only news organizations. You can write for, you know, traditional news organizations that are print, you know, publishing on all sorts of platforms like we are. And you can't really be a TV reporter now and not write for their website. So the days of, you know, TV or broadcast majors not knowing how to write are absolutely over, because there's no value in that. So I think the more open that young journalists are to being able to do a host of different things, the requirements are way different for the new graduates than they were for us.
What about, I have a question about being a Hispanic woman leader. Obviously in Miami, there's a lot of Hispanics, and so it's a different picture than in the rest of the country. But have you found that to be relevant in any way, that cultural, having a different cultural perspective or being perceived in a different way? Do you see your role as a Hispanic woman executive editor different than just a woman? Hispanic,
well, you know,
just a woman editor?
I don't know. I mean, because we're in Miami, it really is like a whole different. South Florida is really a different. It's like a different experience. And by way of explaining, I'll tell you, when I was in high school, and I had already been accepted to University of Florida, it was my newspaper advisor came up to me at the time, and she said, "Oh, you might be interested in applying for this scholarship." And she puts it on my desk, and I'm like, "Thank you so much." And then she walks away, and I'm looking at it, and then I go back to her. I go, "Oh, thank you so much, but I can't apply." And she says, "What do you mean you can't apply?" I go, "No, I'm sorry, it's for minorities." I was at Hialeah High at the time, so I have to tell you, I wasn't feeling that. So of course, once I went to Gainesville, I knew exactly where I was and what I was, but because that was definitely a different, harsh reality. But I don't think I felt it that much here. I think the reality is that women are still a novelty, almost. I mean, if you think about the fact that the executive editor of the New York Times, Jill Abramson, was just named within the last year and a half, almost a little bit after I was named, and that was the first woman ever at the New York Times to be executive editor. And I was the second, so I want to say that the Miami Herald was a little bit more progressive, because we had our first female executive editor in, I think it was 1989, Janet Chesmere. But I don't think you see a lot of women at major metropolitan newspapers.
Mm-hmm. So we have several questions from online. One is specifically about Janet Chesmere. Do you think it's easier for you because the Herald has already had a female executive editor? Do you think that's made your path more smooth?
There's so many years between us, but I have to say that, you know, yes, I probably have to be grateful to every woman who paved the way in some way, large like hers or small that came before me, because it doesn't come overnight. I think it's like chipping at an iceberg. It's little things. It's, you know, the first woman who's the city editor, and then the first woman who's an assistant managing editor. You know, those small incremental steps then make it easier for someone to be able to do what I do. But she was the trailblazer, really. Mm-hmm. I think in that sense, you know, I don't know this, but I assume she was probably the first woman anywhere of a major metropolitan newspaper.
So a related question, because there are typically fewer women in leadership roles in journalism. Did you feel competition or camaraderie from other women? How did other women perceive your kind of rise to leadership?
I felt really supported. I think two things that are really important, that were important for me, was that one, I practically grew up at the Miami Herald. I mean, I did literally start there as an intern fresh out of college. And even though I left for about 5 years, I spent the bulk of my career there. So I really grew up with a lot of these folks. And so I worked alongside them as a reporter at one point, or I worked alongside them as an editor. I worked for many of these people, which is a little bit more of the awkward thing when you start you're somebody's boss and you used to work for them. So I've experienced all those things, but I think that because I came up through the ranks, I felt like people gave me a certain credibility, because they knew the long road that I had taken to get to where I am They knew that I was a reporter. They knew that I worked in, that I was out chasing stories, that I was out, when there was a police, a shooting, that I had done all those things. And so I think it gives you a certain credibility to get to this place.
And so a related question that someone posted was, what about men in the workplace? How did they react to having a woman boss? And was it difficult for some people to adapt to that change? Did you receive criticism?
No, again, I mean, maybe I didn't hear it, maybe that's how that worked out. But overall, I felt, again, there's a team of us who we've worked together for so long. And again, a core group of my leadership team, I used to work for them at one point, and maybe it's just good karma, right? You just treat everybody nice because you never know when the tables will turn. But I felt like I had support from men who were there. But again, I think maybe it's different because we've known each other for 20 years. And I think that changes the dynamics than walking into a place new and nobody knows you. And
So you mentioned that to move ahead in journalism, you have to be a great journalist, right? So definitely work on those skills. But besides that, is there anything that a young student could be doing while in college to give them a competitive edge in terms of leadership?
Well, I think that if somebody thinks that one day they want to be the executive editor or they want to be a publisher, which is a little bit different, I would say that that's the person who wants to try to be an editor at the college paper. And that's really the path for leadership. And being an editor is very different from being a reporter in the sense that it's a far more selfless job. And I don't mean that the reporters are selfish, but there are people who never want to stop being a reporter because they really love the high from seeing their name on the story. And they also love the hustle and bustle of being on the street, knocking on doors, the rush of having to push something on deadline, and that is something that, they thrive on. The editor, you're like the silent partner, because nobody walks in the next morning and says, you edited that story, did that heck of a job editing that story, wow. And even though oftentimes, we do right under somebody else's bylines, as we call it jokingly in the business, when we have to rewrite the whole thing, but not very often. But you're not going to get glory. So it also takes a sense of an egoless person, or not too much of a big ego, because you're going to want you are the silent partner. It's very critical, because it's not just about editing the story in the final. It's really about being a partner with the reporter, the vision for the story. Did you get this? Did you get that? Is it fair? Did you reach out to this person? Is this the right lead, or should you be doing this? So it really is, it does take a different set of skill sets. Now, I think that somebody could try in college to do that and see how they like that. And I find that really writers who are nice writers, clean writers, good reporters make great editors, because even though they don't know it at the time, they can fix a story. They can see where the problems are because they were so good themselves. So I think that's a way to experiment and see which side of the coin they land on.
I know that many of my students sort of view themselves, I guess, as post-feminist, as in we don't need that anymore. And when you look back behind you, what do you see coming up? Do you see women competing equally and not having issues? Or when you look back, for instance, at your leadership team, how many of them are women?
Right. I think I don't think that we're as far along as people would like to think. I mean, they're going to hit hurdles. There's not going to be as many as what I think we hit, and it's not as many as what, let's say, a Janet Chesmer would have hit, somebody 20 years beforehand. Because there are still things that are going to block a woman. And sometimes, and I don't know if it's just because it's the function of being a woman, but I just don't think it's as easy. We're still dealing with things. And again, men now are, I think, more equal partners at home, which helps women when they're at work, but not all, not all men are like that. I think that there are things that can kind of work against you if you try too hard to overcompensate. I mean, I always, and then maybe it's not even overcompensate, but for instance, I always find myself, trying to sit on my hands because, as a Hispanic woman, I want to do this all the time. And if you do that, some men will be like, whoa, emotion, I'm shutting down, I'm not even listening to a word you're saying. So you have to kind of figure out how you communicate, how you say things that don't seem emotional if it's a conversation between a couple of women, but then it's perceived differently. But I think women now will have it a lot easier, but I don't think the path is clear. And I think they're still going to have to struggle with the same issues we struggled with, but in a different way. So that's the same thing about work-life balance and can you have a family. I think I would say there's a mythology around you can do it all. That's, I don't know who sold us that bill of goods, but it's really, I mean, you can do it all, but something's got to give, or you're going to sleep 3 hours a day. And so it's difficult. The juggling act is really, really difficult. I mean, I wouldn't give up on either one, but it's not easy. And so it's this idea that somehow you can, be super mom over here and bake cookies and go to PTA meetings, but then over here you're, in a conference room, setting the agenda for a newspaper, and then, hello, one day you're gonna say, I can't go to the bake sale because I have this really important meeting at work, and one day you're like, I'm going in late because I'm gonna go see my kids play, and you're constantly making those decisions. And most of all, I think it's the idea of like what's postponing having children for a career, and when those decisions are made and are still huge issues that confront young women today.
And maybe one day that juggling act will not be only a women's issue.
Right.
It will be everybody's issue.
And I think increasingly.
And it won't be seen as a liability
Right.
in the future, hopefully.
Right.
That's the work.
You had said that your editor at one point in time took you to lunch and asked you sort of what you would like to do. I would say that probably doesn't happen in a lot of workplaces, and so young women are out there and they may not know where they fit into the workplace. Would you recommend that young women initiate those types of conversations at some point in time to let their supervisors know what they might be interested in, that they should take that chance?
Yes, I think that's true. And I think that's probably the most difficult thing to do. But I would think that women need to take advantage of any opportunity, be it a formal evaluation that happens once a year, or say, I'm thinking about what I want to do next, can we talk? The biggest part of that conversation, though, is having an idea of what you want to do. Too often I have conversations that are, people come to me and they tell me all the things they don't want to do, or the things that they don't like about the current situation, and then I say, so what do you see yourself doing in 5 years? Oh, I don't know, what do you think I should be doing? Well, I have a lot of ideas, but it's not my career. It's your career. And so what's helpful is for someone to have a vision of what interests them, what they want to do. If you can, maybe you can't see out far enough for 5 years, but you can see whether you want a bigger beat, maybe you want to be a foreign correspondent, because that's what's interesting, what I have to do to be a foreign correspondent, or what do I have to do to be an editor, or I see myself, because you can point people if you know what they want. And I tried, whenever I've gone into a new role, like when I became features editor, I had a conversation with every single person in that department. I gave everybody half an hour with a notebook, and it was just, and it was over, 25 people or something. And I was, tell me about what you want to do, tell me about what you like to do, what do you see, what about your job now? And then when the time came to think about how to reorganize things or do things, differently, you said, oh, so-and-so said they wanted to do this, and now I can create this job and move them here, but if you don't know, you can't make it happen. So I think that conversation is really important, and initiating it, if they have to, would be huge.
So what other topics would you like to see addressed by the Lillian Lodge Copenhagen Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication? What do you think? What would you set for us as a challenge? Wow.
I don't know. I think this is a really important mission. I think it's going to be an evolving an evolving curriculum because I think things are going to change. I think this is an issue that you could continue to parse out and get out in different ways. I just think there's the core craft is still continues to be really important, and I just would challenge the university to continue to push for the highest standards, women and so that women are just fully equipped with all the skills that they need to really walk into any media organization and do a great job. And anything that you could do along the way that would bolster that confidence, if they could make women who could make their mistakes here and learn from them here and you're going to make mistakes without a doubt. That's part of growing, but I think it helps when they can make mistakes in a nurturing environment like a university and then grow and learn from them. So that's a confidence booster moving forward.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being our inaugural speaker for the Lillian Lodge Copenhagen Center.
Thank you for having me.
Webinar series. And thank you for those of us that joined us online and those of us that joined us in person. And we will continue this conversation and we'll continue to keep you engaged along the way.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.